Hey, I'm Lynda Steele. Welcome to the podcast Change My Mind. I want to go on a little bit of a rant today about the Canadian political scene because I'm finding it really fascinating right now and also a little bit mystifying and frankly a little bit enraging. And I'm talking about all the parties, frankly, are doing some sort of weird things right now. But I want to talk today specifically about the Conservatives. And just for context, I grew up in a Conservative family in Alberta, and I remember Joe Clark standing on our doorstep in Hinton, Alberta, and my dad actually campaigning with him. And Joe Clark, as you know, went on to become our prime minister briefly. So you product of how you were raised. And when I got old enough to vote, I did tend to vote Conservative. I didn't vote Conservative all the time. I was never a member of the party, not a member of any political party. But depending on who was running, who the candidate was, what the issues were, whether I was being strategic, I did kind of vote across the spectrum. I have voted NDP, Liberal, even Alliance as well. But mostly, especially when I lived in Alberta, I did tend to vote Conservative because it kind of made sense to me at the time. So let's wind this back to the year 2006. I was the 6 o'clock anchor at Global News in Edmonton. And the Conservative leader was Stephen Harper, and he was elected Canada's prime minister. And the premier of Alberta was also a Conservative, and that was Ralph Klein. And these were pretty heady days in Alberta in particular for the Conservative Party because, oh man, Alberta was booming. There was just so much oil revenue going into provincial coffers that they literally didn't really know what to do with it all. And I know this is crazy, but Ralph Klein came up with this kind of a stunt. It was controversial. He said, I'm going to give back some of that oil revenue directly to Alberta voters. So he mailed a check to about 3 million of us in Alberta for $400 each. And they were dubbed Ralph's Bucks. And I remember thinking, that's not an insignificant amount of money. And since I wasn't expecting it, I ended up spending it on a DVD player. But for the most part, the Conservative policies made sense to me at the time. But man, wow. I mean, things have changed so much. I moved to Vancouver about 15 years ago, and I'm looking at my home province of Alberta now, and I'm going, what the hell are you people thinking? The Conservative government there, led by Danielle Smith, has been doing some pretty eye-popping things. And one of the most distasteful is that she's been kind of playing footsies with the separatists who are feeling really emboldened to the point where they're putting on their cowboy hats and they're heading off to Washington and they're having meetings with sort of the Trump people and making little deals and promises behind closed doors. And I'm thinking, shut up. You do not have the right to decide whether Alberta is leaving Canada. This is ridiculous. I think there's, let's be generous, maximum 25% of Albertans say, yeah, I might be interested, depending on what that might look like. And that is not a mandate. You can't make promises to leave. So that's really annoying to me. So I'm looking at Alberta going, man, I just don't recognize what's going on there. But then I think about BC, the province I'm in now. And about a year and a half ago, the Conservatives, the BC Conservatives, almost formed a government. They had previously formed a kind of unholy alliance between BC Liberals, BC Conservatives, and they kind of tried to jam them together in the same party. And they had some success because they almost won. But there was also the inevitable problems with people not agreeing with each other. And there were some members that were more in the center and some of BC Conservative MLAs who were pretty far right, to the point that some crazy things were said and some people were kicked out of caucus. And now BC Conservatives are sort of scrambling, trying to find a leader that everybody can, agree to. So they're fumbling around a little bit. And then if you look federally, Pierre Poilievre was in the same place. I mean, he almost won. The poll showed he was going to win and be the next prime minister. And then Trump and the 51st state BS and Carney became, the liberal leader, and it became elbows up with Carney. And Poilievre decided to go in the other direction, which was, no, we're going to focus on economic issues and pocketbook issues. And that's not where Canadians were. They kind of picked the route of, I like that other guy better. I'm super mad at Trump. So that's left Poilievre Poilievre, to my mind, is the way I see it. He seems very frustrated right now, especially with floor crossings and what have you, really angry and dismissive and kind of leaning into some of the things I really dislike about what's happening in the States right now with grievance-based politics, culture wars, and all the rest of it, kind of slogan-y stuff, axe the tax, just like Trump saying, make America great again. I just don't like it. I don't like the tone. And so it's left me wondering, really thinking in the last year, has conservatism changed in Canada? Or am I the one who's changed? I'm not sure. And after our conversation today, I might change my mind. We'll see. But it is time to bring in our producer, Melanie Nagy, and find out kind of where Mel's at.
Hey, Lynda.
Hey, well, now you actually grew up in Kamloops, right? And that's a
Yep.
pretty conservative area, just like I grew up in Hinton, also conservative. Uh, did you have any thoughts when you were growing up about what it was like to live in a conservative area?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Exactly what you said. Kamloops traditionally, consistently has voted conservative provincially, federally for quite a while. I grew up in a household where I would say my parents maybe were sometimes divided, one voting conservative and one being voting liberal. So but all friends and family often were more conservative leaning. But again, I also grew up partially in Vancouver, so I had that exposure to more of an NDP liberal base. So it's really interesting because you are right. Sometimes where you grow up kind of influences how you're seeing this political spectrum. Luckily, I got a little taste of them all when growing up, to be honest. So,
Yeah, and
but
frankly, I think both of us grew up in conservative areas because they were resource based, right? And that tends to lean right.
yeah, that's true. And today, I mean, I know because we've talked about this before, often we talk about these topics over dinner, over a glass of wine. And I know for you, this conversation about what it means to be a conservative in Canada today is something that we have talked about. It's something that you've thought about, the shifting, what you feel has been a bit of a shift in the Conservative Party. So I'm really excited for you today to be able to connect with our guest. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. Your guest today is Brian Lee Crowley. He's the founder and managing director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Now, that is one of Canada's leading public policy think tanks. It's also one that comes with an element of controversy at times because some people see it sometimes as going a little too far to the right, but it is respected by a lot of policymakers. He's also a respected voice when it comes to political and economic issues. He's the author of 6 books, 2 of which were Canadian bestsellers, one including the title Fearful Symmetry. He's had senior roles within the Federal Department of Finance. He has also served on the Globe and Mail's editorial board. He has a doctorate in political economy from the London School of Economics. So this is a guy who knows his stuff. It should make a great conversation for you to explore what it means to be conservative in Canada. So I really hope you have a great conversation.
And we'll see you again at the end for a debrief. Thanks, Mel.
Thanks.
Brian Lee Crowley, thank you so much for joining us and for agreeing to share your big brain with us. I'm really excited to dig into this subject with you. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure. I only brought part of my brain. I hope it'll be enough.
I think it's big enough. So listen, back in the day when I was in Alberta, living in Alberta, a young adult, it was easy to define conservatism. It sort of meant like fiscal restraint and smaller government. But now I'm not really sure if you had to define what conservatism is today. What would you say?
Well, it's absolutely what you just described. But I think we have to add a kind of a second dimension to it. You talked about the economic dimension, the size of government, regulatory burden, the belief that governments don't know better than companies and individuals, what needs to be done in the economy. And I think that all remains very much in place. But we've started to see a second dimension, I think, added to conservatism, and that has to do with cultural values. You hear about the culture war, the woke movement, what's happening in the universities, the discussion about whether students are being indoctrinated. You hear about whether or not men who think they're women should participate in women's sport. There's a whole series of these cultural issues. They're not part of that economic discussion, which is, as I say, very much still part of conservatism. But these emerging issues in which what you might think of as traditional values are being challenged by, multiculturalism, mass immigration. The struggle over those issues is, I think, being added to the conservatism in economic terms that you've talked about. And there's by no means perfect overlap, by the way, but those two dimensions together, I think, are necessary to understand conservatism.
When did that pivot happen, though, to these kind of cultural issues? Do you think there's a connector to the States because of what we're seeing there? I mean, are we sort of following the same path?
Oh, yes, it's very much a phenomenon throughout the West. It's not limited to the United States. You might make the argument that it's farther advanced in the United States. And by the way, I think it's also tied up with attitudes towards Israel, anti-Semitism. All of these things are kind of knotted together in a very complex way. And again, on all of these issues, economic conservatives will find themselves all over the place. So we're going through a period of kind of redefinition of conservatism in which people are getting a feel for these cultural issues, which I would say in the last 5 to 10 years, they've really achieved tremendous prominence, and they were totally marginal before that.
I have a theory too. I kind of feel like the worm may have turned a little bit during COVID. And I haven't sort of floated this theory out to anyone before, so I'll test it on you. It was like in the beginning, we were all freaked out. I mean, it was a novel pandemic and people were dying and people were afraid. And so, generally speaking, the majority of Canadians followed health directions, followed the rules. And then I'm not sure when that changed, but somewhere in that first year, maybe 6 months, 8 months, or whatever, into the pandemic, maybe around vaccine passports or something, there was a segment of Canada that said, to hell with that, I'm not doing this anymore. You can't tell me what to do. You're restricting my right to move. I'm allowed to do this. And they said, I'm not getting a vaccine. I'm not doing the passport thing. I won't wear a mask. And I'm getting in my semi-truck and I'm driving to Ottawa and we're going to have a trucker convoy. Do you think COVID sort of got conservatives turned up a little bit?
Well, I absolutely agree with you that COVID was part of a larger movement to contesting the right of elites to tell us what to do. And I think that old approach is really falling into disrepute throughout the Western world. It's not as bad in Canada as it is, say, in the United States. I happen to think that Donald Trump is a manifestation of a distaste for elite governance. And you can remember perhaps that. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who I think kind of embodied that elite view. We know best. And you remember Barack Obama talking about, people clinging to their religion and their guns, and Hillary Clinton talking about the basket of deplorables, people who are just clearly not intelligent enough to know how their lives should be run, and we're going to do that for them. And I think COVID just and the clear overreach. I'm not saying that COVID wasn't something to be concerned about. That we needed to take steps to protect public health and so on. But I think there's just no doubt that we went way overboard and unnecessarily so, and called into question a lot of basic assumptions that people made about the integrity of their body, that they couldn't be forced to take shots that they didn't feel were safe for them. That I remember watching videos of one that struck me in particular, of a family that was having either Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner in their home in 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 the Outaouais on the other side of the river from Ottawa, and the police burst in and arrested the entire family for having Christmas dinner together. And I just think a lot of people, including me, looked at that and said, "What is going on here? You're bursting into people's private homes where they're gathered in their family to celebrate, Christmas, and you're dragging these people off to jail." I think this deeply damaged the deference that a lot of Canadians would perhaps normally expect to pay to people in authority. And I think we haven't begun to see how that's going to play out.
Well, let's do a thought experiment then. How do you think if Pierre Poilievre was the prime minister at the time, or if he is the prime minister during the next global pandemic, how would he handle, a group of Canadians who say, "Don't tell me what to do"?
Well, I'm hoping. I mean, I can't speak for Pierre Poilievre, but I'm hoping that what will happen the next time is that people will say, "Well, okay, look, we have some experience now. We've never really dealt in the modern world with a global pandemic. There have been, there was the Black Death and all kinds of things in way in our early history, but in the modern world, the COVID is now the kind of test case. And I think that what happened was it revealed that all these so-called experts, they kept saying, well, you must listen to the experts, you must listen to the science. But the fact of the matter is that, in Japan and Sweden and different places, the experts recommended different things. It is not true to say that the expert class all were of a complete unanimous opinion about what needed to happen. And I think it revealed to us that the excessive measures that we took, for example, in Canada, were actually not justified by the benefits that they paid, and they hurt a lot of Canadians, harmed them in the exercise of their rights, didn't in fact contribute much to protecting their health. And I think that experts that think that we will be as biddable as we were last time are going to be in for a rude shock.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all I'll say about that is that I feel like the people who were giving us direction at the time didn't know what they were doing either. I mean, we were learning as we went, and for sure there were mistakes made, and I hope that they will handle it differently in the future. But let me ask you this: what are your thoughts on the Maple MAGA movement that does seem to have been directly an offshoot from what's going on with the Donald Trump regime?
Well, I'm never really clear what people mean by Maple MAGA. I mean, look, Donald Trump is one manifestation of something that we've just talked about, which is I think a rejection by non-elites, blue collar people who, don't want to have fancy law degrees and economics, PhDs and so on, who actually think they know how to run their lives pretty well. And they're getting more and more resentful at people saying, please, who do you think you are? Thinking that you can decide whether, we're going to stick needles in your arms and vaccinate you and do all this stuff. I think one way that the elites in Canada try to stigmatize the rise of this anti-elite feeling is by saying, "Oh well, gee, that's just Donald Trump stuff," right? And I actually think that this is a bad misreading by Canadian elites about what's going on. This is a worldwide phenomenon. We're seeing it in France. We're seeing it in the UK, where reform, the Reform Party, which represents this rejection of elite, we know best for you kind of stuff, is leading in the polls. It looks like the Alliement pour la France is going to do extremely well in the next French elections, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the elites are making a serious miscalculation and a misreading about how to respond to these people who are saying we have to do things differently. This is not working for me.
I hear what you're saying about elites, but at the same time, this movement, whether it's, Maple MAGA or the American Make America Great group of people, is now anti-science, largely anti-medicine, anti-vaccination, anti-media, anti-politicians. It just feels like it's an against everything sort of a movement where they don't trust anybody and perceive anyone as being elitist.
Well, it's certainly true that all of these social movements, in physics, they say to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. The elites went too far in their argument that they know best what's for us. But the resulting rejection of that has probably, I would never disagree with the idea that it's gone too far. I mean, I look at, Robert Kennedy and, what he's doing to the American healthcare system, and I think, this is pretty wild, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it will take some time for the anger and the emotion that drives the reaction against elite rule to become a spent force so that we can start to talk about these things a little more calmly and rationally. But I'm not surprised to see the extent to which there's an anger that has been awakened in people by the excesses of the elite. And we can complain about the overreaction in response, but I think we have to fix what has caused the overreaction and not fixate on the overreaction yet, because the overreaction is being driven by, I think, the bad behavior of the elites, which got us into this mess in the first place.
Yeah, but if we look at what Pierre Poilievre needs to do and the other conservative leaders in different provinces, what they need to do to get elected, for me as a persuadable voter who has voted conservative many times in the past, has voted across the spectrum, not opposed to voting conservative in the future. But right now, what I'm looking for just as a voter is it's been a rough past number of years. I'm looking for hope. I'm looking for optimism. I'm looking for vision, and I'm looking for good policies. And to me, it feels like the Conservative Party is super angry and frustrated and negative and chippy and opposing everything and fixated on culture wars. And I'm just going, yeah, okay, I'm not interested in that. What do they need to do?
Every successful government is a coalition of different social forces, right? And we've already talked about the fact that conservatism, for example, is now an uncomfortable amalgam of economic conservatives, cultural conservatives, and they haven't quite worked that out yet. And I'm guessing that until they do, they're going to find it a tough row to hoe to kick the Liberals out of power. I have to say that the Liberals have been quite brilliant in the way that they've exploited this politically. I thought it was quite clear that the Liberals, in the lead up to the last election, desperately didn't want to run against Pierre Poilievre. They wanted to run against Donald Trump. Donald Trump winning the election in the United States was a gift to the Liberals. Had he not won the election and had Justin Trudeau stayed on, I think Pierre Poilievre would be prime minister today. The Liberals managed to, associate the Conservatives in Canada with Donald Trump, which I think objectively is a pretty neat magic trick. Because if you actually, look at what the policy platform of the Conservatives is, it's actually nothing like the Republicans under Donald Trump. So hey, this is politics, and the winning bet was placed by the Liberals. I'm suspecting that now that the Liberals have got rid of their leader who had absolutely no CV. He'd done nothing in his career, and now the Liberals want to say, "Oh, you can't make Pierre Poilievre prime minister because he has no CV." They've now got a guy with a CV, so all of a sudden that's really important to them. I suspect that while Pierre was the right guy to beat Justin Trudeau, he's maybe not the right guy to beat Mark Carney, and they probably are going to have to wrestle internally about their own leadership. Like you said, I suspect a lot of Canadians want a positive message and one of hope for Canada. And, they probably want somebody who's going to say, oh, Canada isn't broken, but it's hurting. Economically, it's hurting culturally, it's hurting in terms of the loss of our control over the immigration system. There's a whole series of ways in which I think we can make a pretty strong case that Canada has gone backwards in the last decade. For the moment, Mark Carney has picked up that mantle of change and is saying that he's going to make things different now. And look, he's the Prime Minister of Canada, and if he succeeds, Canada succeeds. So we all wish him well. We want him to succeed. Remains to be seen whether he will.
Well, let's just talk about the fact that under Carney, the Liberal Party seems to be inviting a bigger tent. We've seen with the floor crossings, there's people who are more to the left and more to the right. What do you think the federal Conservatives need to do? Do you think they need to go more to the center?
Your question presupposes that the responsibility falls with the Conservatives. For what it's worth, my read of Canadian history is that Liberal governments have always defeated themselves. They've never been defeated by the opposition. And what always brings them down is arrogance. We've been talking a lot about government by elites. There is no better example in the Western world than the Laurentian elites, which, personify, I think, the Liberal Party of Canada, which has come to believe that they are the only people who are entitled to govern Canada, and everybody else is an illegitimate interloper, and they uh, they just cannot help themselves, and this always trips them up. Because ultimately people say, well, actually, we want to judge you on your performance. I look at the things that Mark Carney is doing and saying, and he's saying, we've got to reverse course, that we've driven so much investment away. I don't know, you saw there was a recent report from, I think, the Royal Bank that said $1 trillion in private sector investment fled Canada in the last decade. It's the largest loss of inward investment in the history of Canada. Now, Mark Carney says he wants to reverse that, but I have not yet seen him convince me that he's doing what's necessary in order to reverse that. If he can't reverse it, if he can't bring back the private sector investment, if he can't fix the immigration system, if he can't, fix our armed forces, which have fallen into a scandalous state of dilapidation, and I could go on and on with all the things that have been allowed to happen in the last decade. If he can't, then that's what will bring the Conservatives to power. I personally am not all that convinced that it's the Conservatives that need to do something. It's the Liberals that need to do something, and I'm not seeing them do it yet.
Well, for one thing, he's been gallivanting around the world, meeting with world leaders, trying to come up with new trade deals, is announcing he's going to have a summit in Toronto where he's going to try inviting investors and what have you, and hopefully raise almost $1 trillion or get, the commitments for it. So it's been a year, and I agree that Canadians will have, there's going to be a certain amount of runway, and then they'll be mad if they don't see things happening. But can you also see how Carney has been strategic enough to say, okay, I mean, he's moved the Liberals, I would argue, slightly right of center on some issues, and he's mowed the Conservatives' lawn by picking up some of their policies that they were pitching. And he went, yeah, it's a good idea. I'll take them and enact them. And then the Conservatives were like, oh, stamping their feet, he's stealing our ideas. And so, again, I think that makes Canadians like me who are, persuadable. I can go this way and go that way. I'm not going way left and I'm not going way right. I'll, go a little bit over the center this way, that way. Then I see Carney as being a palatable choice because he's espousing the values of both liberals and conservatives. Do you see it that way?
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that view. I always am struck by the fact that Sir John A. Macdonald, are arguably, in my view, our most successful prime minister. He created Confederation in the face of tremendous obstacles and brought in the investment that created the CPR and all of this stuff. His party was called the Liberal Conservative Party. Right? He wasn't. He didn't have the Conservative Party. He didn't have the Liberal Party. He had the Liberal Conservative Party, and I think part of his great formula for success was to say that there's a great political tradition in Canada which transcends political parties. I had an institution, called the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and I called it that for precisely that reason, because, a conservative, a liberal, an English speaker, a French speaker, because I believe that there is a great Canadian political tradition which transcends party politics. And so to that extent, I think that Mark Carney is tapping into something quite profound in Canadian history and in the psyche of Canadians. The only thing I'll say about it is that, as I've tried to suggest already, I hear him saying the right things. I hear him setting the right objectives, but I don't yet see him taking the actions that will make those things happen for us. And so I'm not saying he's failing. I'm saying I'm suspending judgment until he demonstrates to me that he knows how to get done the things that he describes quite attractively. But I'm looking for the beef.
And I am too. And I think a lot of Canadians, maybe not conservatives, are watching Mark Carney and thinking, I hope he succeeds because we're in really messy times, being threatened by Trump and the tariffs, and our economy isn't as great as it could be. So I do think Canadians want him to succeed. But then I look again at the conservatives as they're trying to find their new place then, if Carney is kind of treading on their territory a little bit. And then I see that Polyev, maybe not as much right now, but they seem stuck in the past. It was like he had a game plan and it was working and they were riding high in the polls and he thought he was going to be the prime minister because he was fighting Trudeau. And then boom, Trudeau left. And much like Trump couldn't stop, he was so mad when Biden stepped out. I kind of feel like that Polyev didn't have a plan B, didn't expect it and didn't know how to pivot.
I agree with that. And I remember getting a message. I'm on all kinds of political parties' mailing lists because I run a public policy think tank, and so I'm on the Conservatives' mailing list, like I'm on lots of other parties' mailing lists. And I remember, like a couple of days after Mark Carney had made this big deal about signing this piece of paper that allegedly got rid of the carbon tax. I say allegedly because that's not actually how we change laws in Canada. It might be how you issue executive orders in the United States, but we don't have the prime minister sign papers and hold them up and say, "See, I've now changed the law." I'm glad to say that's not how we do things here. But anyway, he'd made it clear that he was getting rid of the carbon tax, and I got an email from the Conservatives a couple of days later saying carbon tax Carney, blah blah blah, and I think, what are you talking about? I mean, the guy has just got rid of the carbon tax, and so and by the way, I thought the Conservatives made a serious tactical error in the lead up to the campaign, in the following sense. I said that the Liberals were hungry to run against Donald Trump. They thought this was their real ace in the hole, and indeed it turned out to be so. But what I said, and I wrote an op-ed about this, I said one of the things that Pierre Poilievre needs to do is to establish very clearly that he is not Donald Trump and doesn't share Donald Trump's objectives. And the way that I suggested that he do that was to go to Washington and get on a prominent platform, at a think tank, or there's lots of places you could do this, and to say, look, I'm Pierre Poilievre. I'm running to be Prime Minister of Canada. I hear all kinds of things coming out of Donald Trump's administration about Canada. I'm here to tell you, just because I'm a conservative doesn't mean that I'm Donald Trump's puppet. And I'm here to tell you all the ways in which I disagree with the way Donald Trump talks about Canada and the way that I want to run the relationship with the United States, and create some distance between him and Donald Trump. But they were terrified in the conservative campaign office at anything to do with the United States. They just were afraid that they couldn't manage it successfully, and so they didn't do it. And I think it was a terrible tactical error, because I actually think I listened to Pierre and his economic platform and so on, and he's just not Donald Trump, just not.
Okay, but he did go, and he had a major platform, went on Joe Rogan, and actually,
The election after it was too late. But anyway,
yes,
never
after
mind.
it was
Yeah.
too late. But he came out and he said all the things and sounded like kind of prime ministerial, and he wasn't taking the bait, and he wasn't crapping on Carney or the Liberals. And I thought, okay, maybe this has been his come to Jesus moment, and we're going to see a little bit softer, more thoughtful, less prickly Poilievre. And then shortly after, he went on a podcast and attacked Carney again and said he was poorly educated and didn't know anything about economics. And everybody was like, come on, that just makes you look stupid when you're criticizing somebody with Carney's resume around economics. That just makes Poilievre look like, I don't know, mean-spirited or out to lunch. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I like you. I quite liked the Pierre Poilievre that I saw on the Joe Rogan podcast. Who knew he knew so much about MMA, right?
Right?
I too interpreted it as an attempt to kind of recast his political persona. There are going to be missteps. He had to do one thing, appearing on an American platform, which he probably didn't feel so constrained to do on a Canadian platform, and maybe that's a mistake. I don't know. You see, I think the Liberals are also very good at listening to what people don't like about Pierre and playing a little fast and loose with the facts in order to really drive home this image they want to create of Pierre. What I have in mind here, for example, is it is the job of the leader of the opposition in a parliamentary system to criticize the government. And all this stuff about, oh, he's so negative. Frankly, that's rubbish. It is his job to criticize the government and to say that they are not living up to their commitments to Canadians and why. And, the Liberals run around and say, oh, Pierre's so negative. He's angry. Come on, get off it. this is his job as the leader of the opposition. Now, that said, could he distribute more of the responsibility for that to, his front benchers in the opposition, so that some of them are doing more of the criticizing, and he can take a higher road? Sure. I think that's a fair comment. But, all this stuff about, oh, Pierre's so negative, every time I hear that, I just want to scream, because I think it's nonsense.
Okay, well, then maybe the way I see it is it's a tone issue as well, because I'm also really turned off as someone who's spent, an entire lifetime in media. And as a voter, I'm turned off when I see Polyev attacking the mainstream media, being disrespectful, acting like Trump, the whole fake news kind of thing. And I just don't think it's necessary. And it leaves me wondering if what I'm seeing and hearing is just the frustration of a party that hasn't been in power for a really long time and is super mad about it.
Look, I run a public policy think tank. I'm interested in policy. I'm not really interested in spending this entire broadcast talking about Pierre and his personality. Can we talk about something else, please?
Okay, well, why don't you tell me what you think the Conservatives are doing right now?
I think that they are correct in their assessment that the Liberals are consistently overreaching, for example, on human rights issues. Their legislation, removing the protection for the free speech protections for use of religious texts, for example, I think is a vast overreach of legislative power. I see them, talking about affordability, which I think is absolutely a crucial issue for Canadians. If you look at public opinion polls, all the issues that people who run public policy think tanks and write editorials in newspapers and so on talk about, they just don't resonate with voters. When you talk about the price of gasoline and whether you can afford a house and that kind of issue, you really get people's attention. And you can see that the Liberals are trying to respond, I can't say very successfully, to the affordability issue. I mean, they've rebranded the GST rebate as, some kind of affordability benefit, which is, I mean, if there was a truth in advertising law, that would fail. And I think that they're able to identify the issues that people really care about. And I think the Conservatives are trying to build a conservative party that is not focused on what the left always tries to say Conservatives are focused on, which is making the rich richer and immiserating the poor. They're trying to, on the contrary, create a kind of a working class conservatism, which doesn't fall for the elites know what best for us kind of stuff, and a working class conservatism that understands that successful companies are not simply a milk cow for the tax system to milk, but they are the people who give them jobs, and that if there isn't private sector investment in Canada, there are no private sector companies to give them work. And so there's a lot of themes, I think, that the Conservatives are starting to zero in on, but I think it's early days yet. And of course, I suspect the Conservatives are reluctant to talk very much about what they would do in a positive way, precisely for one of the reasons that you mentioned earlier, which is if they do have a good idea, and hey, this is politics, I'm not criticizing, the Liberals steal it. Hey, good. Okay, that's the world we're in. They want to keep their powder dry. So, part of the dilemma they're in is that constitutionally, their job is to be critical of the government. Yes, their job is also to provide positive alternatives, but they have to keep their powder dry, because otherwise the Liberals just steal it. And Fair enough. So it's a tough job. Uh,
And it is. And I think you're right, too, because I do not think Polyev was wrong in wanting to take the approach of focusing on economic issues during the election. That should have worked. But we're in a weird time where the Trump and the 51st state and all the rest of it, and the gamble didn't pay off for Polyev. But I don't think he was wrong. I think that is what Canadians care about usually is pocketbook issues. But the timing didn't work for him on many fronts. So I'm curious to know what you think of the separation movement in my old home province of Alberta and how that might create a conundrum or make things more difficult for the Conservative Party writ large.
yeah, I worry a lot about what's going on in Alberta, and that's partly because I love Canada. I think Canada is a unique place with a great deal to offer the world. And not just in economic terms, but in terms of values and moderation and compromise and all these things that a lot of people seem to dismiss, I think, far too lightly. I have to say that I think that Alberta has been terribly, terribly treated by governments in Ottawa, especially in the last 10 years or so. I I just think, they've done everything they can to turn the screws down on the great generator of prosperity in Alberta, which is the oil and gas industry. They've driven out when we talk about $1 trillion of investment leaving Canada over the last decade, I'm here to tell you a really, really big part of that was money that would have gone into the development of the oil and gas sector. So Alberta has foregone a tremendous amount of economic development, of wealth creation, of turning natural resources into value for Canada. So they've foregone that. Because they're a wealthy province, and God knows, good on them. Because they're a wealthy province, they pay a lot of taxes to Ottawa. So, Ottawa's taking a lot more money out of Alberta than it's delivering back in the form of services. So, Ottawa is preventing them from developing their industry. They're taking a lot of money out. They're not giving services equivalent to the amount that they've paid. And you know what? Albertans are pissed off about it, and I don't blame them. Now, Mark Carney is making a lot of good noises about wanting to fix this, and he's negotiated this memorandum of understanding with Danielle Smith and the government of Alberta, and that's good. I'm here to tell you that people in the oil and gas industry, because I'm talking to them like I'm talking to a lot of other people all the time. They're not very impressed with the MOU. They don't think it's going to fix the problems that plague the oil and gas industry and that are holding back Alberta. We've got this separatist movement, which is, I think, it's still very much a minority taste in Alberta, but they've got some wind in their sails, and I worry that just as in the UK, most of us thought that the idea of the UK voting to leave the European Union was a pipe dream. That'll never happen, and here we are. These things can get a life of their own. Alberta, by the way, is in a very different position from Quebec. Quebec, which has got this long-standing separatist movement, it's a province that enjoys threatening separation, but every time they've been offered a chance to actually do it, they have declined. And I think that that's largely the result of the fact that it would be pretty hard to make the case that Quebec would be better off outside Canada than inside Canada. Alberta, I think it's a much closer run thing. There would be costs, no doubt. There would be costs to leaving Confederation. But if it meant unlocking the literally hundreds of billions of dollars of value in the oil and gas industry, I can see that some people might say, well, okay, yes, I'm a Canadian. I feel Canadian. I want to be Canadian. But why is Canada treating us so badly? I worry that while I very much want Alberta to stay, that we have not yet created the conditions in which the argument to stay is overwhelmingly convincing.
Interesting. I mean, I want Alberta to stay too. Let me ask you one last question. Look into your crystal ball and say I don't know, 5, 10 years from now, what do you think conservatism is going to look like? The same thing? Is it going to be a pivot?
I think that cultural issues are going to continue to rise in importance. Whether we like that or not is kind of irrelevant. The debates over immigration and the right way to run the immigration system, debates over trans issues, woke culture in the universities, and not just in the universities, but in government, in the courts, crime and punishment issues, where people just are losing the sense that we have a police and court and incarceration system whose primary concern is to protect law-abiding Canadians. I think people are losing confidence in that idea. There are a lot of people in big city riotings and so on who know that, the chance that their car is going to be stolen is actually quite high. And if it is stolen, and you phone the police will say, what do you want me to do? Right? Your car is probably already in a container on a ship to Africa. So I think these cultural issues writ large and the performance of government in the service of, a civilized way of life in Canada, I think these are going to be real front and center issues.
Brian Lee Crowley, fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. All right. Wow, that was an interesting conversation. Let's bring producer Melanie Nagy back in for a little bit of a debrief about how you felt that went. And my mind is still sort of buzzing with a bunch of thoughts, frankly.
It was a conversation. So number one, that is what I liked, because I think there were different elements of the conversation that could have gone different places, because it touched on, like we talked about, this is a controversial space, whether it's Alberta separatism or talking about a liberal or a conservative kind of this idea, or leaders or Trump. Like, it's a really, this is a delicate space. So I think you both really demonstrated an ability to have a conversation. I'm going to be honest, I didn't love that he kind of said, let's stop talking about his personality. I felt that in a conversational place, if we're talking about learning to listen and talk, I feel like that was kind of a shutdown. And to me, that's sometimes what we see when things get sticky. People shut it down and they won't kind of tread in that place. And I think it would have been a safe place for him to tread with you, but he didn't want to.
And the reason that I was interested is because I like a lot of the policies that the Poilievre government has been putting out. And apparently so do the Liberals, because they've taken some of them. So I don't think the policy is the problem. In my opinion, I think the problem is tone. And I've seen that in a lot of different places. So I was trying to pick at that, wondering if really the fix for what ails Poilievre is just to tone it down a little bit and be less prickly. But that's me also talking as a voter, and he's talking as an academic from a right-leaning think tank. He says he's not a conservative. He doesn't belong to any political party, but,
I thought it was interesting, and I do think, because I do think this happens, and I think it happens when people talk about this issues, whether they are in a space like we are, in the media, or at the kitchen table. I just noticed throughout the conversation, I was really, because I know you went into this, because we've talked about it, this idea of what does it mean to be a conservative in Canada today? That's something that you were really searching for when you entered this conversation. I feel like we talked a lot about the Liberals and what the Liberals aren't doing, or what the Liberals should do. That would be great in its own different space. And I get how it has to be part of the context, but I felt like I wish we could have talked a little bit more, like as a Canadian, like you said, as somebody yourself, who's voted Conservative. What does it mean to be a Conservative today? I'm not quite sure I've heard a lot about that, but I want to hear from you. This is about your journey. So how are you feeling?
Well, I don't know that I've changed my mind. I still feel like something has shifted with conservatives right now at all levels. And I feel like they've got to find their way. I primarily feel like there is frustration that they were doing a lot of the right things and that the timing hasn't been there for them. So yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like I didn't change my mind. I still think something's afoot. What is it? What is the next iteration of the Conservative Party going to look like? I don't know. And even that sort of struck him as he was trying to think it through with the crystal ball of wondering what the Conservatives were going to look like in the future. He kind of pivoted back to culture wars and what have you. I think personally that it's about coming to a place where the majority of Canadians are, that you got to fish in a bigger pond and you got to attract with the lure and the bait more people to join you if you want to, take power, whether it's municipally, provincially, or federally.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a conversation. It went into a lot of different places. But from what I'm hearing from you is that you're in the same place you were before you began the conversation.
Yeah, still looking, still hoping, still wanting a healthy Conservative Party because I think that makes Canada healthier if all the parties are doing well and have a clear vision. And so I'm not giving up on them. And I'm certainly not saying I'll never vote Conservative again, but I'm waiting for a moment where I see the version of conservatism that works for me. So,
all right.
Mel, thank you so much.
Thanks, Lynda.
I do kind of think my big takeaway is that ultimately what I'm hearing and seeing from the Conservatives is a frustration. They've been out of power for a long time. They feel like they have good ideas. They want to bring them to the table. They want to have a majority so they can enact them. And I'm pretty sure that's going to happen again. We've already had multiple runs of Liberal governments, and just the odds are that that's not going to continue in the future. But I agree with him that we're all better served with a healthy Conservative Party. And that's all I'm looking for in the future. And in the meantime, I'm going to watch and I'm going to see how it changes and pivots and how it sort of speaks to me. But for now, yeah, I didn't change my mind, but I'm keeping an open mind. And I hope you are too. Thanks so much for listening.